Thielen, thanks for coming down.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
It's an honor to have you here. And all the things that are happening, it's just amazing. This is one interesting year, if you will, politically.
It is an interesting political year. It's also interesting with what happened at the legislature this year.
Yeah, let's talk about that. There's something really activated you, motivated you to run for office, and certainly got your dander up in this past session. What was that?
The past session, I watched a lot of the legislators push through some bills. They were saying it was for jobs and trying to fast-track development, but also written into these bills, kind of woven in, were things like bypassing the procurement code, allowing government to give out direct personal service contracts without public notice or public bid. And so it kind of rang false to me that this was for jobs. And I was very concerned. It's bad government, it hurts the environment, and it also hurts communities to have development fast-tracked without community input.
Where did it come from, and what reasons did they give to take these extraordinary steps?
Well, I think you can have a cynical approach or a non-cynical approach. I think the cynical approach, which may be right, is that there are a few people that are enriched by these decisions and have a vested interest in having them passed. The non-cynical approach is there may be some public officials that are frustrated at how long it takes government projects to get done from start to finish, but they don't know the law and they don't know how the agencies actually manage these contracts, so they're not able to come up with a detailed answer on how to simplify without coming at the expense of public accountability or transparency.
So they decided to throw the baby out with the bath.
That's my opinion, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, exactly what happened? What was the process? And again, who put it in there? And what jobs and projects did they hope to benefit?
It was a huge number of bills this session. It was kind of stunning. You had a number of Senate bills and a number of House bills, and then as they crossed over, a lot of them were being gutted and replaced. So you had people in both the House and the Senate that were pushing for bypassing permitting. And some of the biggest ones that came out at the end, some died in the 11th hour, but some did pass. But you had one Senate bill where they wanted to give the governor superpowers to bypass permitting for an unspecified number of projects in unspecified locations. Trust us, it'll be fine.
My goodness.
Another bill where it would create this exceptional planning areas in urban areas around unspecified locations, but a half-mile circle where you would no longer have any zoning apply. So any height limitations, any use limitations gone. And there were 3 alternate locations in Kailua that kind of came to the public attention, and that would mean that you could build a 10-story hotel in the middle of Kailua if you wanted, under these exceptional planning projects.
Setting all the rules aside.
Setting all the rules aside, and because the law, if it had passed, when the development came forward, it would be too late to have any public comment because it would be already approved.
Well, it sounds almost fractious. This is going to a place where we have never been, for reasons that we don't understand, for projects that we really haven't vetted.
It is, and I think it surprised a lot of people, including maybe some of the legislators. I think what happened is it snowballed. Some of these things went forward last year, and then people got eager and started throwing a lot more forward this year, and maybe the idea is let's push as many as we can. Because some of them were being stuck into bills, later on, the public wasn't aware of them, and they were just seeing how far they could go before the end of session. And some of these bad bills did pass. One, for task force members. We have a state ethics code that says if you are an employee or an appointed person on a task force, it's a privileged position. You should not be allowed to make money off of it. And they basically waived the ethics code for members of task forces. So now, under state law, this passed, a lobbyist can be appointed to a task force. They can have access to confidential information, and they can use that information for their financial gain and for the financial gain of the company that they are representing on the task force.
Who was watching the store?
There were a lot of people watching the store, but I think this year it was almost an arrogance at the legislature at pushing these things through. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to run for office, is I just felt strongly that this was a wrong direction for our state. And hopefully there's a lot of other people who are running for office too that would like to change that.
I hope so. Do you know anybody specifically who's making this a campaign platform position as you have?
I'm not sure because a lot of these campaigns are very local for the state legislature, so it's really talking in your community and going door to door and your handouts. And also we have a very compressed campaign season this year because they moved the primary back to August 11th instead of September. And then with the reapportionment maps, the campaign started late, so it's a real tight season this
Yeah,
year.
one of the concerns in the morning paper was that August 11th is an odd day, so you have turnout questions.
Mm-hmm.
Turnout questions at the federal level and at the state level.
Yeah, and it's going to be an important primary for many, many races.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the policy behind this. I guess that the people who got on this bandwagon in this session got on this bandwagon because they were at least arguably concerned about getting projects done, not hung up in environmental or other, state process that arguably, or that agreeably, that we all agree on, takes a long time. And they wanted to see more action in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
This was for arguably, this was for economic reasons. How do you feel about those arguments? And is your feeling, across the board on all of these? Does your feeling apply in all of these bills and matters, or some of them?
I think all of them, because a lot of the processes that are in place are making sure that taxpayer money is being used appropriately, that it's not being given out as favors or in return for campaign contributions, that the government is accountable for expending taxpayer money. I don't think we should bypass that accountability. And as far as the permitting goes, if you're going to put a development project into a community, and a lot of communities in Hawaii are very densely developed already, a lot of times that project, with going through the permit process, you identify, do we need, because traffic is bad here, do we need an extra lane for a turnout so you don't slow down traffic so that this development doesn't make it a lot worse? Do we need a stoplight here to make sure that pedestrians are safe? If we have a school in the neighborhood and kids are going to school, how is it going to impact that? When you bypass permitting, what you're saying is none of those things are going to go into place,
Right.
and the community
Exactions.
is
There are no such thing. It
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
Well, not just exaction. It's more that the development, there's a cost to that development on the community, and who should bear that cost? You want to make
Right.
sure that it's paid for as the development goes in. If you don't have those mitigating things go in place, the community pays the price with more traffic congestion and less safe streets.
Right, and the developer doesn't.
Right.
So it's a go, no-go kind of thing instead of a negotiated result.
And then the permitting on the environmental side, a lot of people say, oh, this is anti-environment, you've got to save jobs, and let's do the jobs, and that's more important. But the environmental permits are more than just the resources. I support protecting the resources, but even for people who don't, the environmental permits make sure that we keep beach access. We keep access to the mountains and the trails. I mean, when the hotels first built along Waikiki, they were blocking beach access, and our Supreme Court said, no, these are public beaches. We need to make sure that access is maintained, and everybody in the state has benefited from that. So, you want to make sure that you keep those types of conditions on development so we don't lose the things that make Hawaii so unique.
Yeah, we could make, in this process, without environmental process, we could make mistakes that we'd be paying for forever.
Yeah, but I think there are ways to make the process faster, and we certainly should look at that, but without coming at the cost of the environment or the communities.
Yeah, I just want to get the background, though. So I guess a number of people felt or feel strongly that all this environmental process, I'm wrapping around a lot of, statutes, I guess, all of it was too tough. And rather than roll up their sleeves and figure out how to, sort of update that for the modern time, how to make that work in the modern business, economic development environment, they just threw the baby out with the bath. That was their approach. Okay, so, and your feeling is that's not a good approach. We should we should look at changing the law rather than exempting everyone or certain people from the law?
Well, in some cases, you may change the law, but in a lot of cases, it's not, the law is fine. It's just how are the agencies doing business? And is there a way that they can be more efficient in
Granted.
how they go about following the law?
A lot of people have said that the agencies are underfunded, understaffed, and you give somebody an application for this or that, and they don't have the time to do it, so they sit on it and it waits at the bottom of their basket for months or years. And that's terribly unfair to everybody, including the poor civil servant who can't get to it because he's underfunded, understaffed, undertrained, whatever it may be. I mean, is that so? You were the director of DLNR, chair of DLNR, or did that happen there? Is this an ongoing problem in our state government?
Absolutely. And you have a lot of, because agencies are set up where you'll have maybe in one single agency, you will have 2 or 3 divisions taking a look at a permit, or they have to put out a contract for a job. And so there's a lot of redundancy and reinventing the wheel across these different branches of government. And a lot of times staff who aren't necessarily trained, say in the procurement code, are being told you have to write a request for proposal that's highly technical, highly complicated, to get a certain type of construction done or service done. And if you make any mistake in that contract, you can be halfway along the process and then you'll be told you have to start all over again. And that's happening in Office A, Office B, Office C, Office D. So it's a very inefficient, way for government to be putting projects out. And certainly we could do a lot better.
Well, it sounds like a lot of people, not necessarily the management, but the bureaucracy itself, are concerned that they're going to make a mistake, are concerned they're not qualified, they're being asked to make, for example, procurement code decisions when they're really not qualified to make that kind of analysis, and there's nobody they can go to easily, for help and consultation, so they lock up. And that's what I'm getting out of this.
For instance, at Department of Land and Natural Resources, when I was chair for state parks, we would need to, let's say, put out a contract to put in a new bathroom in a park. We may need to do a contract to ask for a high-tech company to come in and put our camping permits online. So we would have to put, a park ranger would be told, you have to put together a procurement request for proposal. That can be very, very complicated. It's a very complicated document. And they're not lawyers, they're not accountants, they're not engineers, but they're trying to get something out as best they can. And then down the line, you may have people come forward with questions during bidding that raises, okay, maybe we weren't as clear because we didn't anticipate this, because we're not contractors. And so they would have to go back and restart the process all over again.
And from a personal and career point of view, taking this risk is not something you want to do. So most people are risk adverse when it comes to their job and their reputation and so forth. So they avoid the risk by not taking it.
I think part of it is that, and part of it too is that, when you have stacks up to here on your desk, you're going to gravitate to the stuff that you know how to do. And so maybe that continues to stay at the bottom of the pile.
Okay, that's one element. Are there other elements that have, created the lockup that these people who wanted the exemptions were concerned about? What else is happening here in the government that has created the milieu, in which people, in large numbers of legislators were seeking exemption? What was the basis of that?
A lot of the people in the environmental community were pointing out it's not like there are hundreds and hundreds of environmental assessments and impact statements being done each year. I think the figure I saw was last year there was something like 90. Many, many projects are actually already exempt under law from going through that environmental assessment. It's really your big projects that are going in on raw land. And there you may have people pushing for exemptions because it's the owner of the land, the developer, of a raw piece of land who has a huge financial interest in being able to fast track the permitting and bypass the permitting process. They would save time, which is money. They would not be required to put in mitigation measures, which saves money. and they would be able to sell their final product a lot sooner.
Oh, this is great. This is like from manna from heaven.
Yeah, so I think what you have is some very powerful interests that represent a very small percentage of people that are pushing to bypass the contracts. And a lot of the people who benefit from these contracts, like I spoke about earlier with the communities, you know, they kind of get confused in the debate and don't necessarily weigh in.
Yeah, well, that's true. You have so many factors. I mean, just hearing you discuss this, one of the factors seems to me that there are activists out there who get involved in this, and they will oppose a project, especially a large project, on the basis of some, say, environmental concern they have. But then they will use every weapon available. I say weapon advisedly, but they'll find anything they can use to slow it down or stop it, based on the flip side of what you described, namely, let's break the bank. Let's break the developer's bank. The more we can make him wait, the less likely he'll have the deep pockets to go through. And in fact, I think we have a process of selection going on in Hawaii where only big developers have the money to wait long enough to do the big deals. And as a result, for that and other reasons, you know, big projects always have a hard time. And we have a hard time finishing big projects. So it's just one of those factors where the bureaucracy in general has a problem in anticipating the fact that activists will take every opportunity. They will never, you know, go along with a decision or a process until they have beat the thing to death, you know, to the Supreme Court.
Well, I think you want to keep, there's different kinds of projects. So what you were talking about right there is kind of a private sector project
Yes.
and development.
Yes.
And I think what a lot of activists are saying, and what I'm saying too, is we do not have enough land in Hawaii, especially on Oahu, where we've urbanized over a third of the island already, to keep doing single-family homes over broad swaths of land. Eventually you run out. And we're supposed to be building a bigger urban corridor in downtown Honolulu, but we're not. You know, so it seems to be the worst of both worlds, is that we're being told we're going to build a, you know, a very expensive rail project, but continue urban sprawl and suburban sprawl because, you know, the population projections for Honolulu are not putting more people down along that urban corridor as promised. So that's the private sector. But the other side is the government projects. And I think that's where... Infrastructure. And that's where you would probably have a lot of agreement between environmental community as well as labor and government and developers, that we want to get that infrastructure that's in place upgraded. And there are ways that government can do that more efficiently, but without bypassing the permitting to make sure that you're protecting the environment and the communities at the same time.
So give me an example of this so people can relate to it. So I'm government, and I have to do, or for public policy purposes, for the benefit of the community, I have to do a given project. It's important to all of us. No one will argue its importance, but I have to go through the process. The process customarily takes X period of time. You're saying that, you know, you have to live with that. You have to follow the process. But what about, you know, in a situation where I'm really up against some kind of deadline, where it's late already, you know, because we are late, we are behind on infrastructure. That's the middle name of Hawaii. So how, you know, what do I do to make it work faster? I mean, I'm the government, and I'm talking to the government. I don't want an exemption. What do I do to make it work faster?
Well, we are late and behind a lot of times because it's our own fault, that we haven't figured out how to do things differently. Again, back when I was at Department of Land and Natural Resources, I sat down with our parks, our harbors, and our trails staff, along with our chief engineer, and said, you know, what we need to do is, instead of going in piecemeal to fix places up, let's come up with a comprehensive plan to fix up a lot of areas much more quickly, over a 5-year period. And the engineer, the chief engineer, sat down with me and he said, Laura, you know, the way we've been doing contracts is we want to spread the work around. So we give out a little contract here, a little contract there, a little contract there. And he said, I can't do all these projects if I continue to do business that way? Can I change how we do business? Absolutely.
Sure.
So he went back and sat down with his staff and said, if we were going to put together, instead of maybe 20 million in projects this year and 10 million next year, if we were going to look at maybe 200 million over a 3 to 4 year period, how would we do those contracts so that we can start to get them out in a disciplined manner? And they came back with a plan where each year they would start construction year one with the projects that were already planned and begin planning the construction for projects in year two. And so it was a rhythmic, each year you were doing construction and then planning for the next year, construction, planning for the next year, construction, planning for the next year. And what he did is, instead of putting out one contract for parks and one contract for harbors, if they were located in the same geographic area, he put out one contract for both, because you could get the construction done more cheaply if they're pouring cement in the boat harbor that's next to the park, at the same time. So it's one staging. So we were able to come up with a process that got jobs out faster, got them finished quicker, and got them done more cheaply.
You actually did. You were able to achieve this.
Yes.
That's really to your credit. No kidding.
Well, actually, it's to the chief engineer's credit.
Okay, well, it's to your credit to allow him to play that out, because it seems to me that just listening to this seems to me, when you say, he said in the original discussion, we have to do it in little pieces. That's really kind of a Hawaii style thing, isn't it? We want to take care of all the contractors. Fair is fair. Nobody sits on the bench. We get everybody out there in one contract or another, so we can feel that we've been, excuse the term, but we've been democratic about it, and nobody gets left out. Everybody gets to play the ball game.
But I think what happened is, when he came out with that spreadsheet, at the end of the day, everybody got work still. It was just done in a much more efficient manner for the contractors as well, because it's not like they want to go stage job A and then have to break and then come back later and stage job B, because that's difficult for them to manage too.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm really happy to hear that you conceived that and with the engineer and did it, and I hope it continues. You're not there anymore, and I hope it continues.
I think it will. I think everybody there realized, what a difference that could make. But it is because government tends to work in their little silos, and what that did is it said we can't have a parks silo and a harbors silo, and instead this is a government project. And what's nice about approaching it that way is, for the general public, they don't understand that this parking lot belongs to parks and that parking lot belongs to, it's the state. Can't you just do your job for us as the state? And I think if we could change more agencies, and even across agencies, to do that type of contracting, we could be a lot more efficient, both in time and money.
You get economies of scale, but you also get expertise. So the fellow who does the procurement aspect of one also does the procurement and it's not fresh material each time there's a contract. So you get a higher tide rising all the boats.
Yeah.
But I'd like to go back to another aspect, and that is the redundancy and parallel tracks. Rather serial tracks, which should be parallel tracks. Billy Kenoi, now fighting to keep his job on the Big Island. I like Billy Kenoi. Is famous for an effort he made, which I think was successful in Kona, to put all the agencies together in one room.
And lock the door?
Well, pretty much, yeah. Lock the door and say, you guys figure it out. Don't come back until you've solved all these. And he handed a bunch of permit applications. He said, talk to each other. Sit across from each other and talk to each other. It's the anti-silo kind of medicine. Don't you think this is part of it?
I do. And actually, that's what we did at DLNR, is we brought everybody into the same room, and I said, I want you guys to figure out how to get this done, and then you make a presentation to me. And it was really cute. They came back after a couple weeks, and they made a presentation, and it was impressive. But I figured they could actually do better. So I told them that, it was a good start, but they needed to go back in the room and, do more, and that I believed they were capable of a lot more. And they did come back out a couple weeks later with something that was really, really stellar. And that's where I saw that the silos had broken down. They were talking about having an integrated a hiking trail integrated with a blue water trail that would begin at a park and end at a harbor and stop at a forest reserve. And so no longer was it the divisions. I mean, they were looking at it as if they were people that wanted to use these areas, and together they were providing these services to the public, and to the resources. And that was great.
Oh, I mean, to me, I used to do a lot of hiking.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get out and I used to ride bike all over the islands. And I used to see all these places that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, and the judiciary was part of it, it got more difficult to get to the trailhead.
Mm-hmm.
And that because of case law and liability of owners and all that. And now I don't think that the people in Hawaii get out as much because those trails are not maintained or have not been maintained, because the access is not all that clear. So what you've done is a great thing for the people who would like to get out and spend more time outdoors. Hopefully more, with this kind of development, more people will get out. I mean, we talk about the Aina all day long, but you really have to go out and touch it.
Yeah, it is. We have some of the most beautiful places in the world, and we don't get out often enough. And
Yeah.
we do. We
Yeah.
need to get out more.
So you're an environmentalist.
Yes, I'm very much an environmentalist, a feminist. All those. It's. Yeah.
So, I sort of want to talk about the Democratic Party. I want to talk about the experience that Ed Case is having, which was in the paper this morning. And where do you fit in the Democratic Party? Because when you have only one party, which is really pretty much what we have, the party it's like cells dividing. The party itself divides, and then you have, what did he call himself, a blue
Dog Democrat.
A blue dog Democrat, as opposed to what he calls Mazie Hirono. She's very left-wing Democrat. And it's a sort of a dividing the cells of the Democratic Party. Where do you fit in there, and how do you see the Democratic Party functioning that way?
In Hawaii, we always like to think we're so unique, but actually, nationally, this is kind of going on in both the Democratic and more so in the Republican Party nationally. But you just, pendulums swing. And right now, we seem to be in a pendulum swing where it's uncertain how far it's going to go for the Democratic Party in Hawaii. But apparently, there's been some discussion for about 5 years, if not longer, about having it be a more closed party versus an open party. I think sometimes just in the political fights, because people within a single party in any primary election, some people are going to back one candidate, some people are going to back another. The easy criticism to say is, well, you're not a Democrat. But when you ask people to define a Democrat, those folks, it usually comes down to, well, you don't agree with me. Well, the party is broader than any individual.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So, Ed defines himself as a blue dog Democrat, and that's a DC term for a fiscally conservative, socially
It was a
liberal.
caucus in Congress, I think, by that name.
Yeah, but I think they're probably vanishing at this point. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But we live in interesting times in terms of politics in general. I mean, check me on this because you're much closer to it, but I get the sense that the young kids in Hawaii and elsewhere really are alienated from politics. They don't like what happens in legislatures. They don't like what happens in government, and so they find other ways to focus their time. And I have noticed that in case of some of the young entrepreneurs in this town, they haven't gotten to politics yet, and they're not inclined to get there simply because it's distasteful to them. And their predecessors have found it distasteful, and it sort of passes on down. So they're removed and remote. And you are a rare bird in the sense that you're an idealist, and you stick by your values and all that. But you're an exception rather than the rule, which, I welcome that. But I think that is a lot of kids who might be idealists who aren't going to go into government. And so you stand out there as one of few.
Well, I'm far from a kid. I'm 51, so I wouldn't count
Sorry.
myself as part of the younger generation. But no, I still am somewhat of an idealist, and I believe in change from the inside. That's where you can make change happen. You can also make change happen from the outside, but I just think it's important to have people on the inside pushing for change too. I think you're right. about especially entrepreneurs. They are people who like to get stuff done. And it's not easy to get stuff done in government. And so, they're going to put their energies where they can see, the ability to build something constructive. I've been going door to door on my campaign, and you get these walk lists from the voter registration, and it will say, like, how many elections people have voted in. And house after house, where it's multi-generational, and it's got the names of all the registered voters, you'll see the older voters voting in every single election. And then you'll see the people in their 40s, the generation they're living with them, not voting at all. So they registered because, mom or dad wanted them to or expected them to, but they just don't participate. And that's dangerous.
Why is that? Why is that happening?
I don't know. I mean, it's happening across the nation. That guy who wrote that book, Bowling Alone, like 10 years ago, that Americans just don't join the way they used to. But when you have a democracy where just fewer and fewer people are making the decisions, your government starts making choices that is not in the interest of the majority of people.
Not that it applies directly in Hawaii, but the whole thing about Citizens United and the super PACs was the subject of a number of talk shows yesterday and over the weekend. And you get the feeling that another structure is being built here. And Linda Lingle's part of that structure, actually, where money equals votes equals power. And it's a new America that way.
It is. It's frightening.
Yeah.
I was hearing on how much money is going to be spent in this presidential election. We're going to see it in Hawaii over the U.S. Senate race because the Republicans are targeting the Senate, and the Democrats are going to target trying to defend it because it's not a given what's going to happen in the Senate, this election.
Yeah. Well, there was a Bill Moyer had a show involving two women co-editors of something called Mother Jones. And this is a California pub that is dedicated to finding where the money comes from. And one of their big questions was the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which I think most people always said, well, that's good, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they build business, right? Can't be bad. But those guys are funneling millions, hundreds of millions, into local races, including the Linda Lingle race, and you don't know where that money is coming from. It could be coming from anywhere in the world, and that's very troubling. And it's almost you want Justice Kennedy to wake up with a bad dream and say, I'm going to change my opinion on that.
I think this election, when people see how much money is being spent nationally, there is going to be a push for some type of campaign finance reform around corporations because it's just going to be an obscene amount of money.
And it's secret money. They can't trace it.
Yeah, and that lack of transparency, you just shouldn't have that in things that are as important as elections.
So what about raising funds for you? You're running for office. I guess with all your government experience and all your legal experience and all your local experience, being part of the fabric for a lifetime at your advanced age. This is the first time you've actually run for office.
Yeah.
So what's it like?
Well, actually, I did run for Board of Education back in 2002, and that was, I think, like a couple $1,000s of, getting myself a few signs and bumper stickers. This one, I've been calling people for support, but, it's actually mail. It's not that expensive, and again, a state Senate seat, a lot of it is just the face-to-face, door-to-door, walking and sweat equity. So I'm putting a lot of that in. I was told that I would lose a lot of weight. So far, that hasn't happened, so I've been very disappointed. But
cheer up.
Yeah.
It's
other than that,
cumulative,
Yeah, I'm getting some, good walking muscles, especially for the hillside areas. Oh.
Yeah.
But no, it's been a lot of more sweat equity than anything else.
How about raising money? I mean, they say it takes a fair amount of change, more than before, to be a state senator. So how are you doing? How do you do that, and how are you doing at it?
I haven't had experience doing that before, so what I've been doing is just calling people I know and asking them if they would contribute or help support. And most people have been, very supportive of that. I've decided not to take political action committee funds, even from political action committees that I like their viewpoint, just because I figure, I just would like to do this on personal contributions.
Good for you. No kidding. I'm very impressed. That touches me.
No.
After watching the point on being discussed all weekend, that really touches me.
Well, we'll see. I mean, it's not like they were necessarily offering me a lot of money anyway, but I get a lot of letters from them, and I don't know. I thought it would be better to try and do this face to face and with people.
Well, it means that, to the average Joe, your opinions remain your own, and you're not being manipulated by somebody who's funneling money at you.
Yeah.
Which is the concern that I had watching those discussions yesterday, that at the end of the day, these super PACs, they buy the views
Mm-hmm.
of the people they support, and you get into that, into that fabric, and you're stuck there.
And that kind of goes back to the participation in democracy. I was just reading this morning, there is a race, I think they said it was a Senate race in Massachusetts, where both the Democrat and Republican agreed about 5 months ago to say we don't want this outside groups putting ad money into our race. And to date, they've not done it. That the outside groups haven't come in, and so it's just been the candidates paying for the ads themselves. And I think a lot of people nationally will be watching that race to see what happens. I think, unfortunately, whichever side loses is probably going to be arguing, we should have had that money come in. But you kind of hope we could maybe get to the race towards the highest common denominator rather than the lowest common denominator.
Yeah. So tell me about some of your platform positions. I mean, I get it that you're an idealist, but I'd like you to flesh that out in terms of what positions you're taking on what issues.
Well, again, a lot of the reason I got into this was seeing these bills around fast-tracking development, getting rid of government transparency over expenditure of monies, and allowing insiders to take financial advantage of their position. And I don't like that, but I also don't think government shouldn't be all no. I think it's part of government's job to figure out how do we provide the essential services that government's responsible for in a efficient manner and a cost-effective manner. And so what I would like to do is take the experience I had from Department of Land and Natural Resources and be able to get into the legislature and start to have the conversation that if that's really the goal, here are ways that we can help make agencies' jobs easier, help them do them faster, and still maintain that public transparency and accountability, and be more constructive at getting our infrastructure upgraded and stretching our dollars further.
Yeah. Hell, I mean, one of the big issues, both nationally and locally, is the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, do you agree with me that our economy is lackluster? That we haven't made it back yet? Our economy is at great risk because we're a mono economy, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that so far nobody has figured out how to fix that. Thoughts?
I agree with you. We are far too reliant on a single private industry, which is tourism, far too reliant on a single senator with the greatest seniority in the U.S. Senate, which bless his soul, but we need to be able to be a little bit more self-sufficient for the future, and far too reliant on construction of raw land as opposed to construction in urban places.
And reconstruction
Yeah.
and all that, yeah.
And I think it is important that we bring fresh voices to the table because we'll always be reliant on tourism. I mean, that's just always going to be a draw that Hawaii has, and it's actually an asset for us. But if we only listen to the tourism voices and we put our tax credits and benefits in that direction, it's not going to come up with a diversified private sector, and we need more diversification so that we can withstand the cycles of tourism, because there's always the downtime. So I think fresh voices at the table is important. That's why I was really disappointed at this ethics bill that said we'll allow lobbyists to be on task forces and make money from it. I mean, the reason I heard is that we need this expertise, and I'm thinking, geez, can't we bring new expertise to the table? Why are we relying on the same lobbyists time and again just because they're familiar? I mean, it's time that we try different things.
Yeah, I also read somewhere that the Ethics Commission itself doesn't have to file applications and disclose, which is kind of interesting.
I'm not sure, I don't know about that one.
Oh.
But I think the other big issue for Hawaii, really, to move ahead is our education. Public education, because...
What's wrong with it, and what would you do?
Well, we've been stuck near the bottom of the nation in student achievement for decades, and that is in spite of many good people in the system. They time and again have looked at ways to reform the education system, and despite the fact that I don't think anybody's happy with the system, it fights off any restructuring. And I think we do need to go back and revisit how we do public education, where our sole guiding light is student achievement, because that's what's really going to help us all. And it's in the interest of the people in the education system too, because we have a lot of unfunded pension benefits that the state's not going to be able to meet its obligations unless we find a way of really strengthening our economy. And that's going to be reliant upon our youth.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about the economy. I mean, every single thing you can think of would do better if we had more money to give it. Well, maybe not everything. Some things are pure principle, but it seems to me that education is one thing where you have to throw the money at it until it works. And I mean, you don't want to be silly, but you certainly you don't want to hold back, because that's the most important asset of the state, the most important resource. So, how exactly would you do that? I mean, you ran for the Board of Education. I don't know how you feel about the new appointed board, or about, the efforts that have been made. Linda Lingle wanted to do it on a statewide, countywide basis. And I'm not sure that any of those things are actually working, would actually work. I think there's a bureaucracy in the Board of Education that pervades. And you're right, I mean, but how do you change an organization which is A, powerful, and B, resistant to change?
Well, so far it's been successful at resisting change. And I think what it's going to take is really, I'm not sure that you can find a change where there is consensus. If there were easy change where there was consensus, it would have been done already. And so what we've got is a situation where, in a lack of consensus, what do? And in Hawaii, what we tend to do is let the status quo go on.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. People got very upset with Furlough Fridays, enough to change the board from an elected board to an appointed board, and we should give that some time to see how it plays out, and if it's able to make more structural changes within the DOE. Personally, I believe, if you can make the student achievement the guiding principle, and the classroom, the most important area, and the school the second most important area, that would drive a lot of decisions to put more resources at the classroom level rather than elsewhere. When I was on the Board of Education, we paid...
Well, you won that election.
I did win that election. I was on for several years. The Department of Education paid principals and teachers more to leave a school and to come into the central administration than they were paid at a school. Now, I don't know if that's still true, but that just speaks volumes.
It
that,
does.
The classroom is not the priority, and then that needs to be turned around.
It does. And on the notion of change, before we turned the machine on to tape this, you and I were talking about the problem that we have in Hawaii of taking polarized views, sticking on those views, and not looking for a solution. And maybe that's, one element of the problem with environmental exemptions, that people should find a middle ground instead of sticking on their polarized views. And part of the reason for that is that if you try to negotiate, people will find out exactly how much you know and don't know, and you will be required to roll up your coat sleeves. So maybe it's just a question of being diligent or lazy to make the negotiated effort. But it seems to me that Hawaii is at a turning point. I'm sure you have thoughts along the same lines, and that we really must change some of the things that bedevil us. In order to do that, we have to negotiate results. We have to come together on it.
Well, when you say we're at a turning point, it almost means like everybody understands we have to make a decision. And, I think there's also, one of the decisions could be that we're not going to make a decision. We're not going to do things differently. We're going to continue to have this kind of, back and forth.
That's the decision we make.
And my old boss used to say, to not decide is to decide.
Sure.
And it took me a while to figure out what that meant. But what it meant is we're deciding to stick with the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think what will happen is we will slowly lose more and more of our quality of life that we have. Some things will stay. We'll continue to have some tourism. We'll continue to have the military here, but eventually we will lose some of that Senate seniority. In Alaska, when U.S. Senator Ted Stevens went out of office, they went from $400 million a year in federal earmarks to $30 million a year. 1 year difference, losing $370 million. So we need to make these harder choices and try and get more resiliency, ourselves, to be able to withstand some of the changes, or else we'll just have a diminished quality of life.
So as a senator, how could you do that? My first question, I suppose, is your travails with the Democratic Party, which I think are going to work out okay for you, knock wood. That's not going to help in terms of rounding up support in the Senate, is it?
The elected officials, everyone that I have talked to, is supporting me on this, and they don't think it's right for the party to be picking and choosing who can run.
That's great. I'm happy to hear that, Laura.
I am too, and I was a little surprised at first, but then someone said, well, of course, because this is how they're elected. They trust the voters because the voters chose them. So, they don't like to see that happening. So I don't think, if I'm elected, I don't anticipate it's going to create any problem with my fellow elected officials.
Good.
Other things may create problems. But
Well, now here you are, the idealist, and you're the person who would like to, foment change in a moderate way, but who relentlessly will pursue that goal. How are you going to make that dynamic happen in the state Senate?
Well, I think I would bring one thing to the state Senate that nobody else there currently has, which is I've run an agency. I understand the procurement code from the agency perspective. I understand the collective bargaining agreements from the agency perspective and how it works with the staff. I understand how you do contracting. I understand how you implement programs. And so when people are taking a look at how can we write laws to make things better, because those laws have to be implemented by staff and agencies, I can help come up with options for the legislature that would make what they do a lot more efficient and make the agency's jobs easier where we want them, to be easier. So I think that detailed understanding of state government is going to be an asset in the Senate and in helping to craft some good legislation.
I'm sure it would. One of the things that I've always been concerned about in both houses is the distraction factor. There you are, and you do have, we all start with noble ideals, I suppose. Well, most of us. but there you have your noble ideals, and you're distracted on day one because somebody comes in with a cockamamie bill they want you to introduce into the legislature, and you feel that you have to for political reasons, or you're called upon by leadership to do some political thing that you don't necessarily think is the right thing. Distractions, one after the other, all day long. And I think a lot of very good legislators are led astray by those distractions. How are you going to deal with that?
That's no different than as chair of Department of Land and Natural Resources. When I was appointed, before I started the job, I was sitting there thinking, I'm going to be there just under 4 years. And there's really only so much you can do in 4 years. So I need to decide what are the things that I want to get done and make sure that that list is the list of big things. Make sure it's small enough that it's doable, and figure that there's going to be a certain percentage of time that is going to have to go to the emergencies, the crises, and all that. But in the rest of the time, here's what I want to achieve. And so what I used to tell myself every day going into work is what I decide to not do is as important as what I decide to do. And so there's certain things that you delegate, and there's other things that you really focus on. I think being a senator, certainly you have to be spending time with your constituents, helping them deal with the problems that they bring forward, and certainly a large part of the job is doing that. I think another part of the job then is taking the issues that are important to your constituents, and in Kailua, Waimanalo, and Hawaii Kai, a lot of that is quality of life and how development is impacting that, and come up with solutions where government can get its job done without being at the expense of communities or their resources.
Yeah. What about back to the environment for a minute? How do you want to deal with the Hawaii Environmental Protection Act? There was a task force appointed maybe 2-3 years ago, it made a report, and the report was, my recollection is it didn't go anywhere. A lot of talk, a lot of community concern about it, and the cowboys and the ranchers really couldn't agree on who's going to be friends.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing happened. So if this is a core point in your platform, what are you going to do about it?
Well, again, I think, in my opinion, a lot of the environmental reviews that are done need to be done. Again, you already have exemptions under the law, so
Would you
projects.
change the environmental laws?
No, for instance, the 30-meter telescope on the summit of Mauna Kea, they needed to do an environmental impact statement. They should. You know, it's going to be a huge telescope being put on top of one of the tallest mountains in the world that is one of the most sacred sites for Native Hawaiian and has some of the most fragile resources and is adjacent to a bunch of other telescopes where, you know, the construction may impact them. That project needed to do an environmental impact statement. And I think anybody who says that you want to bypass it because it would be too expensive, that would be foolish. The long-term costs that could come out of a hasty construction project
Also
in a place
because
like
it's
that.
a slippery slope.
Yeah.
When you start abandoning those concerns, those rules, then what happens next?
Mm-hmm.
You know, then you're undermining your own view of the environment. Shifting gears for a moment too, in our remaining time, you spoke of diversification. How would you diversify? What would you diversify to? It's a difficult question, because in a way we have to find something that really fits our society, fits our kids, fits our state, its resources and all.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do, and how would you do it?
You know, I think for diversifying the economy, you'd want to take a look at where Hawaii has a competitive advantage and where we already have kind of a nucleus of expertise that could be developed. So for one example would be health and medicine. We have some great hospitals here. We have great rural healthcare and rural communities, and we have just one of the healthiest environments in the world. And we're adjacent to some of the most populous areas in the world in Asia. If you can develop a medicine and healthcare center in Hawaii, capitalizing on the University of Hawaii and the private hospitals, and have, you know, a lot more services offered, it can go from maybe your lower skilled folks that are going to be working at maybe recovery centers where people can recover from surgeries or come here for, you know, respite, up to your highest tech type of medical research and surgeries that are being done at the hospitals. You know, I think that's an area that we should explore. Renewable energy is an area where we have a competitive advantage. And I think also on farming and food. We've gained a lot of knowledge about how to do agriculture, diversified agriculture. Back in plantation days, it was all monocrops. But now you've got a lot of very good farmers here, and if they can get more access to land, you know, we can be growing a lot more of our food here, and that's part of the food tourism economy and the agricultural tourism economy too, but it helps kind of diversify it and bring different people in.
Don't forget bike lanes.
Bike lanes.
You know, I mean, our people live in this environment, but they don't hike, they don't bike, they don't get out, they don't, and then they get diabetes, no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have potentially the most healthy place on the planet, but you got to work a little for it, and it's so easy to do that. But part of that, I think, is public education, and it's not education so much for they should learn information, but they should be on the same page about these issues. You know, and I find that we have a sine curve. Everybody gets excited about energy in 2008, and now 4 years later, they're not so excited.
Well,
They're
except for
concerned
the solar
about the
energy
cost.
is doing well.
They're concerned about the cost,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so when liquid natural gas comes in, that's real appealing, even though it's a fossil fuel, because it's cheaper. So I think public opinions changes on all these issues.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, they were much more, it seemed to me, they were much more concerned, excited about agriculture, local agriculture. I'm not sure they are anymore. So part of it, I think, is to keep people aware,
Mm-hmm.
keep them on the same page, so they don't lose track of where we're going.
But I think people are still supportive of agriculture. I've been to a lot of the farmers markets because I was the agricultural liaison for the city for a bit, and they're just packed with people. And a lot of the farmers are starting to grow more product for the markets. You got more small farmers coming into business. But at least on Oahu, the challenge is getting access to land.
Mhm.
You know, long-term leases where they can invest in developing the soils and putting their infrastructure in place.
Do I have
So-
to ask you how you feel about Ho'opili and rail?
Okay. Well, I think the problem with, Ho'opili is in an area that was planned for development, but I have a couple problems with it. One is, 20 years ago it was planned for development, but we were also supposed to identify the important ag lands where the agriculture could go for long-term and be safe there. And government never did that. And so the farms that are being displaced at Ho'opili have no long-term home.
Right.
And so I have a big problem with saying we have to stick by that 20-year plan when we've failed with 50% of the plan. And we're hurting, agriculture now. The other problem I have with Ho'opili is if we're really going to do transit-oriented development, why are we doing single-family homes along the rail line? You go to any urban area with steel-on-steel transit, and what you've got, walking distance there is a much denser development where people are getting into the trains. It's the same type of development we've seen time and again in Hawaii, which is sprawl. And so that's troubling.
Yeah. Well, it'd be nice to know there's at least one legislator in there who opposes sprawl, because I think a lot of people oppose sprawl.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time we had a long-term plan. The word plan really resonates these days, as it did in DLNR. It certainly does all around the community.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Laura. It's been great to talk to you.
Well, thanks for your time.
Wish you well.
Thanks.